Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're very excited to have Chris Hardesty here to share more information about the new parking and admissions tax to educate all of the City of Canton partners. Thank you so much for Downtown Canton Partnership, for all of your outreach to partners. And again, we are truly grateful for Chris and the city offering this information session to help you guys all best prepare for January 1. So go ahead, Chris.
Morning, everybody. My name is Chris Hardesty. I'm the Director of Economic Development here for the City of Canton. I work closely with everyone here, well, with at least Todd and Allison and everybody at Visit Canton and DCP and the CID and our other stakeholder groups. Recently, you guys saw in the paper and probably saw my name a lot about the City of Canton's emissions tax and parking tax that we implemented a few months back. And I know there's been a lot of questions floating around there. So I was invited here to give some more information about the emissions and parking tax to provide some clarity to some questions and just some general information about, how it might be collected, how you might, apply, remit and all those other things. So I'm just going to go through like the high points about the emissions tax, its use, when it goes into effect, things like that, and the two main definitions that are associated with the emissions tax. And then I was provided some questions that you guys submitted to have some clarification on, and I answered all of those. So we'll go through those question by question. And then after that, we can open it up for further questions or anything else like that you might have. And if there's anything I don't know, or if you could actually put your questions in the chat, that way I have them afterward, because I'm probably not going to write them all down as we're going, just because it's easy for me to copy and paste. So I'll go ahead and start. Again, this is an informational session here for City of Canton parking and emissions tax. And so the key points of the tax are it goes into effect on January 1st, 2025. And there's a few qualifiers in there for exemptions and use and things like that. So venues that provide live entertainment and have an occupancy of less than or equal to 150 are exempt from taxation. Admissions charge that are equal to or less than $10 is exempt from taxation. So if you have a movie night and you charge $8 for admission, don't worry about it. That's not a taxable admission in the eyes of the ordinance and of our policy. There are general exemptions for municipal, public school district, board of education, public safety, religious, educational, and charitable types of events. So I know we have a lot of nonprofits here that have a lot of questions about my nonprofit that owns a venue and X, Y, and Z. So we can get into that a bit further once we start going into the questions. The use of the funds is, I said for government operations, because we wanted to tie in some civic center stuff. But also for economic development, tourism development, infrastructure improvement and development throughout the city. But those activities must be associated with some type of economic development project. So we're not just going to give money to give money. So examples of how we kind of theorized how we might spend the money is your organization's working really hard to get a new show to come to Canton, and you need an extra $15,000 to, attract that entertainment. There might be a program in the future where you can apply for that, and for us to help cover the costs associated with getting that attraction to the city, be it a large concert or something else, or maybe a public event. So we don't know exactly when the money is going to be available for public use and application, only because we're not entirely sure yet as to how much money we're going to be getting in year one. We're estimating that we're going to get, from $300,000 to $500,000 in 2025 from emissions tax, as long as everyone actually remits and submits the taxes correctly. And then in 2026, we plan to go live with some programming. And, and throughout 2025, we're going to talk to all of you as well and talk to you about, if we're going to make this available for application and use, what type of programs would you like to see out of it? What type of support would you like to see out of it? How do you want that kind of authored and to operate? So that's the general high points of the tax. Again, it's 3% citywide parking and emissions tax. Now in the TDDs, there's a different thing. So some TDDs in the city of Canton, if you're not familiar with that, is a tourism development district. They already have an emissions tax of 5%. So in some TDDs, we tacked on the 3%. So the TDDs now have an admissions tax of 8%, but general elsewhere throughout the city is 3%. So you might have seen some reference in the ordinance to TDD and 5%, and that's because the TDD already had an admissions tax, and we tacked an additional 3% on top of it. And so going into just some key definitions, which I know there's going to be some clarifying questions that we're going to have about this. Admissions charge is the means the charge made for the right or privilege to enter a place. Admissions charge may include, but is not limited to, a charge made for season tickets, subscriptions, privilege of parking a vehicle in any non-residential lot. We know a lot of people park cars in their yards around Hall of Fame. We wanted to avoid the hubbub of, well, I parked 5 cars in my yard around Hall of Fame and charging $20 each, so I owe the tax. No, this is for commercial lots. It's not going to be for somebody's yard around July and August, right? So any non-residential lot, land, building, garage, structure, enclosure, so on and so forth, indoor, outdoor area, portion, except a public way. So street parking is not taxed. So you're not going to get in if you come down to downtown and have to pay $1.50 for parking during at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We're not tacking an additional pass-through 3% tax onto that charge. And then there's some information about rental property services. Those have to be charged. Not all rentals are admissions, right? So if an admissions tax includes the rental of property or services, it can be charged 3%. But that's really up to, if you're remitting taxes and having an application with our income tax department to look at and determine whether or not that's really applicable or not. And then if there's an option that somebody doesn't want to rent the property or the services, but still wants to come in as admissions charge, it's the lesser of the two. So I'll leave that to my smart income tax department and treasurer department to determine exactly how that operates. And then admission charge includes, but is not restricted to. So there's more applications than what are listed here. Indoor, outdoor theaters, bowling alleys, dance halls, amphitheaters, auditoriums, stadiums, athletic pavilions, fields, baseball, athletic parks, circuses, side shows, swim pools, anything that you could possibly think that you might have to pay admissions to go into may be eligible for the tax, predicated on the qualifiers that we talked about from an exemption standpoint and use standpoint. So those are all the high points. Pardon the terrible shatter transition. That was an accident. All of our documentation can be found at cantonohio.gov, admissions tax. My email is here. If you have any questions or any further questions after we go through these questions that were submitted, I'd be happy to talk with you about it. Some things I just don't know. So I might have to go to my law department or go to my treasurer and income tax department to ask for some clarification, just because this is new and we've not done it before. So I need to consult with some people that know more than me about this. And so I'm going to stop sharing here real quick, and then I'm going to pull up the questions that everyone asked, and I'm going to go through those question by question with my answer to that. So if you just excuse me for one moment. All right, can everyone, let me zoom in here. Can you guys see that well? Is that zoomed in enough for everyone?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So question one, there is a charitable exemption. Does this mean that nonprofits are exempt or only events that are for specific charitable purposes? How we will report the tax? How should the tax be communicated to the patrons? So nonprofits and their events are exempt from the taxation, and it's less about the nonprofit and more about the actual event, right? So A nonprofit could have an event that is not necessarily charitable, so that event could be subject to taxation. But assuming that your like fundraiser, galas, or anything else that's going, for fundraising for the operations of the nonprofit, not-for-profit, and everything else, it is in fact a charitable event, it would not be subject to the taxation. So the exemptions should be filed on a per event basis with the City of Canton Treasurer Income Tax Department. The tax is intended to be pass-through tax. So the individuals paying the admission to the event should pay that tax. So if you made in the calendar year 2024, $400,000 off of arbitrary number off of admissions tax, we don't intend to gross your revenues of that. That should be charged up front and then passed through to that person or entity that's paying that and then remitted back to the city. So there's that with nonprofits. A lot of these are a bit duplicative in my answer. Number two, I would like clarity on our axe throwing venue. It's not live entertainment, but we do charge admission, so that would make us required to pay the tax. So yes, so this is not live entertainment. This is an admissions to rent a lane for an hour to throw axes. So as long as you're not within the de minimis threshold of less than or equal to $10, then it would be subject to the taxation. So if you charge $8 for somebody to do this, not taxable. If you charge them $12, then it is taxable. So that is a taxable activity. How would this affect special event venues that are located at our public school or educational partners? For example, if an organization is renting an event space at Malone Educational Facility and it is ticketed conference. So that is not an exempt, unless that event is specific for charitable purposes, it is not exempt from taxation. It is not about the space that you're renting. If it's owned by a nonprofit, it is about the activity that is going on at that venue. So in this case, if you have a big conference, let's say it's an economic development conference and the tickets are $50 per for the whole day, that is a taxable, it's a admissions charge, it's taxable. If you have a big nonprofit fundraiser gala like the Black and White Ball that's held at the, Doubletree, that is a fundraiser for charitable purposes for a nonprofit. That would not be a taxable activity or a taxable event. So it depends on the event and it less depends on the actual venue that the event is at. Number four, we are a 501c3 and our highest admission price for adults is $10. Are we exempt? So you're a nonprofit and you're within the de minimis threshold. Therefore, you're exempt from that taxation. So if that is you that I'm speaking to you right now, I wouldn't worry about it. It's fine. I guess you would only have to worry about if you started charging $11 but you're good to go. Does the new tax apply to nonprofit fundraising events? Again, no, this is a charitable nonprofit purpose event. It's not, you're exempt from taxation, therefore it does not apply. Clarification on many of the rules and definitions. I need you to be specific. So this is a huge document. If you have specific questions about a definition or what something means or anything else, please contact me directly so we can have a discussion on specific points. Because there's a lot of words and a lot of detail that's associated with this. So I would just need some more specific information about what you are requesting clarification on. Are nonprofit venues exempt? Are fundraising events for nonprofits exempt? So the venue specifically is not exempt, right? Like I said, it is about the event that is occurring at the venue. A fundraising event for a nonprofit would be exempt because it is for charitable purposes. And it's for the operations of the nonprofit, right? Ticketed events for rentals at a facility by a for-profit organization. For example, the Carnival of Horrors takes place at the Stark County Fairgrounds. How would this tax be filed and paid? The organization running the facility, Stark County Fairgrounds. Okay, so this is a really good question. We've actually had some discussions with the Stark County Fairgrounds already this year. The Stark County Fairgrounds itself is exempt from taxation. They're a nonprofit government entity that runs the fairgrounds. Okay, so when you pay $8 or $10 to get into the Stark County Fair, there's no tax on that because one, they're a nonprofit, and two, it's within that de minimis threshold. However, if you are a promoter having an event at the fairgrounds, then you're charging $30 to get into the Carnival of Horrors or the tractor pull or the rodeo or the concert. That is a for-profit activity taking place on a nonprofit, a nonprofit owned venue. Therefore, that activity, which is for profit, you're a for-profit promoter, is in fact eligible and should be taxed at the 3% rate for the admissions tax for the city. The promoter would be the one responsible for submitting and remitting that tax to my treasurer and income tax department. So that would not be the responsibility of the fairground to do that, because it is not in fact their event. They are the ones who are having the event at their venue, but they're not throwing the concert or the rodeo or anything else like that, right? So the promoter that is organizing that for-profit event will be responsible for remitting that tax and filling out the application and everything with my treasurer and income tax department. Our seated venue seats less than 150, but our museum can hold more than 150 for a fundraiser, gala, speaker, etc. Are we exempt? It's as I said before, it's less about the venue and more about the actual event at the venue. If you're holding an event at your museum and it's not your event, it would be on the promoter of that event to determine whether or not the event is actually exempt from tax or not. It just depends on the activity. So if you're an event holder and you rent your venue to people, you don't have anything to worry about from like a taxable standpoint. In that case, because it's not your event, right? You're just collecting a rental fee, and that rental fee is not subject to taxation from the admissions tax either. So you can collect your, $1,000 for them to rent it for the day, and they have their event. We just ask that you communicate with that entity that is hosting that event to check in with our income tax and treasurer department to make sure that they're remitting and filing the tax as necessary. Do we need to file an exemption form for every special event, or just one at the beginning of the year? There needs to be a form per event, okay? And if you have a continuous event, let's say axe throwing that you take in every day you have axe throwing or whatever that might be, you can file like rolling exemptions, like on a quarterly basis. A lot of the exemptions that we take in currently with the Hall of Fame Village and the other TDDs, they file them on a quarterly basis with us. They had this much activity, here's what the admissions charges were, here's this tax, right? So so you don't have to file an actual application every day that you have axe throwing. You just need to do it on a more regular basis. 5Ks and marathons. So this was an interesting one. I did not know the answer to, so I requested additional information. It's different than anything else because it's in a public thoroughfare. So it's not really a specific parcel or place or somebody's venue, right? It's on our public streets. So I don't know if this is taxable or not. So I've asked for some additional clarification from my law department and my income tax and treasury department, as well as I'm looking at some other cities that have admissions tax, if this is something that they tax. I think this will be a hard one to say yes to or no to right now. So I'm going to get some more information on that and I can come back with a clarifying answer. The ordinance states 3%, but admissions tax application paperwork states 5%. So this is just an error in the application. As I explained earlier, TDDs have 5%. So we never had an admissions tax citywide before. So all of our applications said 5%. Now that we have a citywide 3%, and then we have a TDD with 5% and then another 3%, we're going to edit the application. That's going to say, basically ask you, are you in a TDD? And if you check yes, then your admissions tax will be 8%. But if you don't check that, your admissions tax will be 3%. So we're going to edit that and get that back out on the website, before January for you guys to look at. So that's all the questions that were submitted to me prior. And then if anyone else has any other questions, I would be happy to, answer stuff like just off cuff now, or if there's anything else I can provide or any other questions, we'll be happy to discuss.
Chris, yeah, there's been quite a few questions that's been submitted while you were presenting on those. So I'll go ahead, I'll read those questions in the chat and then let you know what partner they're from. So Georgia Paxos with the Canton Palace Theater, she asked if the nonprofit venue is selling the tickets for the for-profit promoter, who submits the tax?
So I guess that's a good question. I would say that the nonprofit venue, if you're selling tickets for the for-profit promoter, who's collecting the money? So that would be the nonprofit, right? But it's for a for-profit event. I would say that Georgia, you would probably be the one who would remit that unless that just makes sense. This is an interesting question. And I would also probably assume it would be easier for you to have that 3% tacked on as a pass-through than your promoter, right? Because you have everything set up online. So I would say you would probably remit that, or you would have maybe after you pay the promoter all their things that, hey, 3% of that was this, you guys need to pay that to the city. But the simpler thing sounds like Georgia Canton House Theater would remit that to the city, and then the access would go to the promoter or whatever your deal is with them.
Okay.
The Canton Symphony Orchestra, they asked, what do you consider a charitable purpose? As a nonprofit, all of their events go towards the operations of the symphony.
Yeah, so I would probably tell you that you're a nonprofit, you would be able to file exemption for your events, right? So you would just need to, per concert that you guys would have, everything goes for your charitable nonprofit purpose, file an exemption for those ticket sales and everything like that, and you'd be able to go through that process and exempt that 3%.
Kim Kenny from the McKinley Presidential Library and Museum asked, we rent our museum for private events, birthday parties, wedding reception. This income supports our general operating in our budget. Do we need to charge or file a tax for this?
No, so you're renting your facility that is not a chargeable admissions eligible, right? So you're just renting your facility out for the events and the wedding receptions and everything. So that is not something that you have to charge a 3% on.
Susan Campbell from the DoubleTree downtown asked, will you provide an informational sheet for venues to share with promoters regarding filing taxes?
Yeah, this is a great idea. I can put something together for you guys to, kind of like and I was going to put a flow sheet together too as to if it's taxable or not, so you guys can like kind of discern between what's going on. I'll put something together and I'll share that with everyone that you can share with the promoters and the that are doing the events at your venues.
Awesome. Yeah, if that could live on that tax landing page, then that would be an awesome resource for everyone. Nick Maurer from the Canton Civic Center, he said, what responsibility does the venue hold in making sure the promoter collects the admission tax? Do we need to do anything other than give the promoter the information on how to remit the tax, or by using a service like Ticketmaster, we collect the tax automatically, and are we required to remit that tax or have the promoter pay the tax?
All right. So there's nothing in our ordinance that dictates that the venue holder must enforce a tax, right? Like at the end of the day, the actual responsibility of the remittance of that tax would be on the promoter. We ask you from like a social responsibility standpoint to please communicate with that promoter that there is a tax and it is an eligible thing, to communicate with our income tax and treasury department. And you shouldn't have any type of responsibility to force them or hold their hand. They just need to fill out the application that we'll have on our website about their event, how many tickets were sold, here's the 3%, and then remit that tax to our department, right? So that's on the promoter. That is not, you're not responsible. We just ask that you communicate with them that there is in fact that tax.
Kim Kenny from the McKinley Presidential Library and Museum, she said, are nonprofits automatically exempt from this, or do we need to file the paperwork on your website to apply for exemption?
I mean, nonprofits are exempt, right? But like if you have an event, we do ask that you file the application as an exemption because it is an eligible activity, but we need to see proof that it is in fact an eligible activity that is exempt from the taxation. So basically just if you have like 5 events a year, you file 5 times and show that it's for nonprofit and it's going to the operations or whatever charitable purpose, and then you're good to go.
Scott Swaldo from Gervasi Vineyard Resort and Spa, he asked, For events with food and beverage included, can the value of the admission be separated less than $10, for example, not requiring the tax from the food and beverage charge?
Okay, so this is an interesting question. So
So I think, for example, they charge $35
Mhm.
for their tasting events. And so, but there's food and beverage included.
Right,
So the
right.
actual cost
Mhm.
of the experience.
Right. So I would say so this is interesting for a couple reasons, and this goes back to when I talked about the definition of admission charge, and you got into the latter half of that paragraph that talks about like combined services or rental property. I would say, and now I'll ask for further clarification because I'm not 100% like sure. I would say that the total amount would be eligible for the 3% because it's bundled and then it includes admissions to the facility and the food and beverage. I would say the similar answer that like say you're going to when we get a water park, I'll say when we get a water park and you're going to stay at the hotel that's associated with the water park. You're paying for a room that is bundled that gives you access and admission to a water park. Therefore, the full amount would be taxable at the 3% for the room plus access to the admissions to the water park. So my gut says the full amount is taxable, but it's a bit different. So I will look into that a bit more because it is a very good question.
And then Scott also asked, so some of their events have varied event capacity. Is the capacity determined per event type or the overall facility? For example, some of the concerts may only have a capacity of 120 and others have 200 for the same venue.
All right, so a lot of venues have different venues within the venue, right? So it depends on what the overall is the venue like the full capacity of the building, or is it isolated to a single room that is 120, right? So you might have one event that is encompassing the entire facility, or you might have two events going on in the facility at the same time. I would say that the capacity determination will be predicated on how much of the space in your full facility is actually being used for that event. So if you have 200 within the full venue, then I would say it's probably eligible for the taxation. But if you have a concert in the room for just 120 live entertainment, it's not because it's below the 150 threshold. It just depends on, there could be two events going on at the same time that are completely different and mutually exclusive, and therefore they may not be, one may be eligible and the other one may not. So I would just look at it as like a whole, what the activity is, and you just file the exemption and see if it falls under, or file for the application and see if it falls under the exemption or not. Just predicated on what details you provide with that event.
And then another question from Scott. The ordinance language requires that tax be listed on the ticket as a separate line item. Our ticketing platform does not have that capability. Are good faith efforts to disclose that tax is included in the total price sufficient for this program?
I would say yes, because like at the end of the day, like we have that in the ordinance because it's typical language, but like, are we gonna go around and look at your ticket and say, hey, you didn't separate this line item here? That's a no-no. Like, we're not gonna do that, right? So, your software is not capable of it. It is what it is. Communicating that it is part of that, that's sufficient, I would say.
Another question, Jeff Tompkins from the Camp Memorial Civic Center. He asked, is a registration fee subject to taxation? For example, the participant versus a spectator at a tournament.
Good question. I'll have to dig into that one a bit further. I'm not sure. That to me, gut feeling says you're still paying to be there. So therefore, even if you're participating in the event that's there, I would say that it could be taxable. But I'll have to talk to my law department and my treasurer office.
Okay, that would be that's a big one because I think even Camp Parks and Rec, some of their sporting tournaments that the fields are being rented for. The Civic Center just hosted Tyrant Wrestling. So those individual athletes, they pay a registration fee, but then their families pay X, Y, and Z to come and watch them participate.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'll definitely dig into that a bit more.
Perfect. And if you need examples of that, let us know.
Okay.
The Canton Symphony Orchestra asked, what is the timeline for filing exemption? Can we file for every event that we have a year out, or can it be done only a few weeks in advance?
Well, I mean, I guess, predicated on the information that you need for the event, right? So we generally want to know, the number of tickets sold, the price, what your revenues are associated with the event. So I would say it would probably be better to file after the event, once you have all your financing and everything in order to prove that it, and where that money goes and whatnot, to prove that it is in fact a charitable nonprofit event for your own use. And it was not a for-profit event, held at your venue.
I have an additional question that was sent over by a partner not on the call today. So Explore City Tours, they have a capacity that is less than 150 people per tour, but throughout the entire season, they would have more than that. So are they exempt from filing this tax? Because again, they're only hosting 10 to 12 people per tour, or is that something that they need to think
Well,
about as a season long?
let me ask this. This is kind of sounds similar to like the marathons, right? So do they actually have a physical venue at a building, or do they just kind of bus everyone around?
So they do have a physical office space that is located within downtown Canton, that is where their business operations are.
Right.
But yeah.
The tour is basically around through the public thoroughfare. Um, that's similar to to the marathons and the 5Ks, because you're going around the public thoroughfares and just going to, businesses and doing those types of things. I'll have to ask that question too, because that one's an interesting one as well.
Okay. That's all the questions that are in the chat, but I think we can open up the floor. You can turn off your mics if you have any additional questions for Chris.
Chris, just clarifying the question from the Canton Symphony, since we're filing after the fact, if for some reason the city changes their mind and deems one of our concerts not exempt, I'm a little concerned about filing after the fact, because then we wouldn't
Okay.
tax, and then we would lose quite a bit of money. So I'm wondering kind of what's the policy on that, since we're filing after the fact, but if the policy changes and then we don't get the exemption, then suddenly.
Well, the policy itself wouldn't change, right? It's more of looking at the event to determine whether it was a for-profit or not profit.
Okay.
So, what I can do is, like, if you give me your email, I can get you in contact with our main guy that'll be looking at these in our income tax and treasury department. Because like I understand your question, but he's the one who's going to be looking at these, and maybe he can provide you some more specific guidance on exactly from a timing standpoint as to when you should or should not, should
Sure.
file or not, right? So I would say the policy is always going to be the same. It's a nonprofit, event, unless there's some type of, like, you spent $500 on the event, you made 5 million. Okay, there's a clear disparity there between, like, these things. But I don't think it'll be an issue, but I'd be happy to get you guys hooked up and to talk about that in a bit more detail. And then I can come back to the group with that same information and share it with everybody from, like, a actual compliance standpoint.
Awesome. Thank you.
Chris, I have another question on behalf of Visit Canton. So we sell tickets through our Bandwango Pass platform for our partnering organizations. So for example, we have a museum pass that you purchase and gets you admission into all of the Stark County museums. But our operation offices are located within the city of Canton. Do we need to file that tax, or because the dollars themselves are actually being allocated to the partners that are all nonprofit and throughout Stark County?
Well, let me ask you a question. So when you get paid for that museum, Do you charge your general sales tax and everything else on top of that within the same platform? Or does somebody pay like a flat fee of $120 for it?
Yes.
So if somebody pays a flat fee of $120 arbitrarily for access. Do you just pass that straight through to the museums themselves, or how does that get dispersed?
I'm gonna ask Rosie to come on. She's our comptroller, so she would know the answer to that question, how that side works. But we just wanted to make sure if we needed to file since we're selling those tickets.
I would say that because there's like a mixed bag there of entities that are not within the city and entities that are within the city, I would defer and kind of put that on the museum itself that is located within the city of Canton to do that 3%. Because I can't, ethically charge a 3% on a bulk fee that is not entirely for the city of Canton, right? So that you're just acting as a conduit pass through for the entire county. So if all that activity was just for the city of Canton, I would say, yeah, you guys charge 3% and then remit it yourselves because that sounds better. But since the bulk, all that is not, and only a small portion of it is, I would say that the museum should be responsible for it.
Yeah, so I'll add that the money actually doesn't even come to us. The platform Bandwango collects all payment and
Okay.
they remit to the attractions. So in my guess, if we were subject to that tax, it would be something that our Bandwango platform would have to charge and take in as they get those payments. Because the money actually doesn't come to us for any of that.
Well, let me ask you a question. Is it possible for your platform there to specifically collect a 3% fee on one that is just for the Canton location?
I'll ask Tanja to jump in on that as she sets up the platform for it.
Sorry, yeah, this is getting pretty specific to us, but it would, I think, make sense that it comes through the museum side because it also, just because someone buys a pass that has access to all those locations doesn't even mean that they visit. So it would only be if they went to that location, redeemed the pass, and then there's a portion of dollars then that gets paid to the museum based on the fact that they visited. So it would, I think, then be the museum that needs to remit.
I agree. That's definitely the museum. I wouldn't worry about it if I were you guys.
And from what you stated, the nonprofit venues, this is specific to museum pass. We may, have an experience pass that includes like an escape room, axe throwing, those sort of things. Those would be for-profit venues.
Right.
But based off of what you've shared, museums are nonprofit. Their admission goes into their operational budgets. So that's a fundraiser for them on a day in and day out basis, correct?
Yeah, and that's one of those continual things, right, too. So that's a rolling basis. So they would probably just want to file that exemption like quarterly, for their admissions that they had for their nonprofit operations.
Any other questions that anyone has? Well, Chris, on behalf of Visit Canton and the Downtown Canton Partnership, and I think on behalf of everyone on this call, we appreciate your time today. This call was recorded, so we will share the link from YouTube to this with all the partners, and then again, that website where you can find all the tax information. And then once you have some of those resources put together, Chris, if you could share those with Tony from Downtown Canton Partnership and myself, and then we'll distribute those to the distribution list to make sure that everyone has the tools in their toolbox to make this succeed.
Sounds great. Thanks for the time and thanks for everybody having me. And you guys have my email. So if there's any other questions that come up and that you thought of after the fact, feel free to contact me. I'd be happy to have a discussion.
Thank you.
Thank
All right,
you.
see you guys.
Great day.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Hey, Allison, I'm gonna go ahead and just copy paste all these questions from the chat, or
Okay.
is that good?
Yeah, I'm gonna